NASA engineers are puzzled by the unexpected data sent back from interstellar space by the Voyager 1 spacecraft. Is it the answer to the message Voyager 1 sent to aliens 45 years ago? If we believe some serious scientists, we have really received the first message from an extraterrestrial intelligence. Or the confusing data comes from a completely new force of nature that will change our picture of the universe forever. It's probable that hardly any of you can remember the launch of the Voyager 1 probe, because it was quite a while ago. In 1977, this spacecraft, along with its brother Voyager 2, set out on its journey. The goal? Actually, just to explore the outer planets. Voyager 1 and 2 were constructed in a rush. A favorable planetary constellation offered a unique opportunity to send probes to Jupiter, Saturn, and the outer planets in an extremely shortened time. Both probes are simple, no larger than a Fiat, and would be constructed roughly like a tape recorder compared to a computer today. 5 years would be required for the primary mission of the two, and by then researchers were happy to see them survive launch and get underway. Voyager 1 took the course directly through the asteroid belt. The danger was large to lose the probe thereby, and therefore one sent a second identically constructed probe on the way. If Voyager 1 survived the passage, this would have been a proof that such flight routes for technical probes are also possible later. Voyager 1 survived the passage through the asteroid belt without problems. It reached Jupiter, then Saturn, and flew on and on. The probe has now been traveling in space for more than 45 years, and it was the first man-made object to enter interstellar space. For the first time, scientists held in their hands measurement data from an area they had seen thousands of times through their telescopes, but never could they guess how the great blackness of the cosmos was really composed. I'll say it in advance, the measurement results shocked the scientific community because they had not expected this. Message to extraterrestrials. Would you believe me if I told you that in 1977, nobody knew for sure if there were aliens in the solar system? Well, it's so. Because Voyager 1 and 2 in 1977 each carried a golden record known as the Voyager Golden Records. These records were designed to represent life and culture on Earth to possible alien civilizations. No one knew for sure at the time if there weren't alien spaceships traveling somewhere to our doorstep, or if any of the moons in the solar system were inhabited. At that time, researchers may have hoped or suspected that Voyager 1 and 2 would fly further and further out into the universe after their original mission. In several tens of thousands of years, the two will reach the first neighboring solar systems. Imagine that! A flying object built by us currently needs thousands of years to get to the closest stars. The distances in space are really gigantic, and mostly we overlook that fact. We know thanks to Hubble and James Webb images of the most remote regions in the universe. From Proxima Centauri, the nearest star system, we know all the scientific details, but we would never be able to reach these places. Even Voyager 1 and 2, little lightweight probes, would probably take more than 20,000 years to make a flying visit. If they are once found and investigated by a civilization in the universe, these beings will encounter the two golden disks. Both disks are designed like records and are 12 inches in diameter. They are covered with a protective aluminum sleeve engraved with the noble gas uranium-238 to mark the time span of our civilization. Further included is a needle and simple instructions in symbolic drawings explaining how to play the record. The contents of the plates have been carefully selected to convey a broad spectrum of our human world. They include greetings in 55 different languages, natural sounds from Earth such as thunder, birdsong, and the sound of waves, and a selection of musical pieces from different cultures and eras, from classical music to rock and roll. Another 115 images encoded with a special code show different aspects of life on Earth: people, animals, artwork, and scientific diagrams. Now you may be wondering, what kind of answer we'll possibly have in 30,000 years or more? Well, we may already have that answer without even realizing it. The mystery of interstellar space. Before Voyager 1 and 2 crossed the magical boundary of the heliosphere, no one knew exactly where our sun's sphere of influence ends and where space properly begins. The sun is the massive glowing furnace at the center of the solar system, constantly blowing charged particle streams from the sun into space. These currents and the sun's magnetic force form a complex stellar ecosystem, the heliosphere. Without these currents and the atmosphere that the sun forms with them, we would have no heat on our planet, and we would be defenseless against the radiation of the cosmos. In this way, the sun wraps all planets in a protective shell. At some point, many billions of kilometers away from the sun, the particle streams get lost. They encounter the interstellar medium, the vast black empty space between stars and star systems. For a long time, it was a mystery where this sphere of influence of the solar streams ends and where the sphere of influence of interstellar space begins. Since August 25, 2012, researchers know more because on that day, Voyager 1 was the first spacecraft to break through the heliosphere and enter interstellar space. Our sun's sphere of influence did not end abruptly, however, and not at all as scientists had imagined. Rather, solar currents seemed to extend far into the cosmos. It was not until more than 2 years later, on December 15, 2014, that the measurement data provided further evidence that Voyager 1 had indeed entered interstellar space, and there the next shock awaited the scientists. First, Voyager 1 became completely disoriented in interstellar space. Crazy data initially triggered confusion. Some thought it was a possible message sent by some alien force. The codes were strange, very strange, and while some thought they had to be deciphered, others saw in the data simply a defect. A few scientists dared to say aloud that there might be hitherto unknown life forms in the empty space of the universe, or that communication streams of extraterrestrial species were gliding through empty space like radio waves. Voyager 1 could have detected these currents and sent a message, so to speak. Were we too stubborn and maybe just too inexperienced to understand them? You can probably already guess that the conservative scientists have prevailed once again. And officially, there was no mysterious message, but an error in the communication systems that determined Voyager 1's position in space. The source of the faulty data is said to have been the so-called Attitude Articulation and Control System, or AACS for short. NASA already feared for the future of the probe. Voyager 1 had become decrepit, which was the official explanation, but then the defect could be corrected and the data stream was normal again. Whether now the repair work carried out from the Earth brought the success or whether the strange message from the empty space was simply passed, scientists argue once again. More strange data. Shortly after this shock, scientists had to deal with data they had not expected. Voyager 1 reported a strange force from interstellar space, which should not exist there. Thereby, it possibly concerns a further elementary force, which we do not know of so far. Now, of course, scientists hope that Voyager 1 and 2 will be operational for a while longer and provide lots more data from interstellar space. Most of the technical equipment of the probes has been switched off for years, and only the most essential measuring equipment, which can detect particle currents or magnetic and electric forces, still registers any change, no matter how small, in the path of the probe. The mission continues. When Voyager 1 was launched aboard a Titan III launch vehicle from Launch Complex 41 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station on September 5, 1977, no one imagined that 45 years later, contact with the probe would still be ongoing. The Voyager twins have become dear to NASA and the hundreds of people who work with them. Many a scientist or control center employee has spent nearly a lifetime following Voyager 1 and 2's journey. The images of Jupiter taken by Voyager 1 in January 1979 are still considered groundbreaking today. Because of the better photographic resolution made possible for the first time by an even closer approach, the Jovian moons were visible for the first time. The fine dust rings appeared before the eyes of researchers for the very first time, and magnetic fields and radiations never before suspected could be determined. In 1980, Voyager 1 provided unique images of complex formations in Saturn's rings, and the instruments analyzed the atmospheres of Titan and Saturn for the first time. Following these successes, engineers expanded the mission's objectives to include 2 more major planets, Uranus and Neptune. Together, the 2 spacecraft explored 48 moons, 4 planets, a variety of planetary magnetic fields, and numerous planetary rings. even its home, the then very distant planet Earth. The probe snapped like no vehicle before. The image, which shows the Earth as a pale blue dot in the darkness of the cosmos, is considered one of the best in the history of space travel. It was taken on February 14, 1990, and was the last image taken before the probe's camera systems were shut down to save power. It was almost like a final look back, with Voyager 1 saying goodbye and setting off on a long journey to an unknown destination. In space and engineering circles, the two probes are legends, and scientists involved find it hard to imagine life without Voyager 1 and 2. If all goes well, the two space pioneers will remain accessible until the end of the decade. In the meantime, it takes more than 2 days for a signal from the probes to reach us. This communication is possible over extreme distances only by 3 very high-performance antennas, which are distributed on the entire globe. The annual power output of the spacecraft is reduced by about 4 watts, limiting the number of systems that can be operated. Voyager 1 appears to be acquiring and transmitting science data, normally again after its jolt, at least in most cases. It's receiving commands from Earth and executing them. We may yet be able to find out what Voyager 1 really encountered in interstellar space. Subscribe now and look forward to upcoming video hits. A quote from Ingo Swann: "I am not the first to see that we are not alone in the universe." Can you imagine a clairvoyant man being able to look all the way to Jupiter with just his mind's eye and provide accurate scientific data? Ingo Swann did just that. Not only did he report facts from Jupiter's atmosphere long before the Pioneer spacecraft confirmed them, Swann also saw something on the moon that is guaranteed to send a shiver down your spine. We are not alone in the universe. Ingo Swann is what is called a medium or a psychic. Swann can't see the future, and he doesn't predict lottery numbers. His exceptional talent has developed a special kind of consciousness projection where psychic vision is projected to a faraway place. Remote viewing is an ability that was studied even by the CIA and other clandestine organizations, particularly in the 1960s and 70s. Along with other psychic mediums, Swann developed various techniques to explore every conceivable location on Earth and in the universe using only the mind's eye. What Swann and his colleagues saw in the process shocked them and put the CIA on notice. Swann received a strange visit one day, disappeared completely from the scene for days, and was then silenced by the CIA. Many years later, he breaks his silence and finally speaks out about the monstrous things that happened to him in the clutches of the national security agencies. An extraordinary medium. As a child, Ingo Swann had the unique gift of seeing distant things and places. In the 1970s, Swann participated in some scientific research on remote viewing and collaborated with dozens of researchers from the US and Europe at the famous Stanford Research Institute. In 1977, Reader's Digest published a report on Ingo Swann's successes in remote viewing experiments. In the experiment, the medium had been able to transport himself to practically any place in the world, describing places, streets, and surroundings perfectly. In further experiments, the medium was supposed to influence plants with mental activity or change the temperature of its environment. Swann also succeeded with ease. When astronomers at the Stanford Research Institute came up with the idea of having Swann examine various locations in the solar system, he hesitated. No one would be able to confirm his distant sightings if he mentally beamed himself to distant worlds. Ingo Swann feared his sightings would later be challenged and declined an offer to project his consciousness to Jupiter. The last thing Swann wanted was to be called a fraud. That was in 1973, and a short time later, NASA announced the launch of the Pioneer probe, and it was to study Jupiter in particular. Satisfied that the probe might confirm his findings, Swann agreed to participate in the research after all. He found himself in a lab at Stanford, looking toward Jupiter. Sitting comfortably on Earth, Swann described Jupiter's hydrogen mantle, rotating storms raging on the surface like massive cyclones, high infrared readings, ice crystals in the atmosphere, and the colors of the clouds. What would you think if I told you now that Pioneer has confirmed almost all of these observations? Incredible, isn't it? Still, a small hitch remained because Swan saw something Pioneer didn't. He saw a ring around Jupiter, similar to Saturn's ring, but this was much smaller and closer to the planet. According to Swan, this ring was made up of dust and tiny asteroids, but neither Pioneer 10 nor Pioneer 11 saw anything that even remotely matched Swan's description. Was Ingo Swan wrong about Jupiter's ring? Well, no, I can tell you that much, because Jupiter's wafer-thin ring was also confirmed a few years later by a technically better-equipped probe. After that, Ingo Swan had a reputation as an outstanding medium and received many orders from science and private fans of his work. The shock of his life. In March 1975, something happened that changed Ingo Swan's life forever. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he received a phone call. The voice on the other end asked him to come to Washington to the Museum of National History. He was specifically instructed to be in the lobby of the museum at 12 noon. A little surprised, but also curious, Swan showed up for his blind date. There, he was approached by a stranger who looked like he belonged in the military. Without speaking a word, he handed Swan a note that said, "Do not speak or ask questions. This is for our safety as well as yours. Please follow me." The mysterious man led Ingo to a car where another man was waiting. Ingo refers to these men in his book as the twins. The other man searched Ingo and asked him if he would be willing to work on a project that required absolute silence. When Swan agreed, the twins put a bag over his head and the car sped off to an unknown location. After some time, they boarded a helicopter and flew on. Upon landing, Swan was led into a building, and only then was the medium allowed to see where he was again. Although no one introduced themselves personally, Swan knew full well that he was in a CIA laboratory. Another man told Ingo Swan about a secret remote viewing project and promised to pay him $1,000 per day in cash for his services. Swan had agreed to stay in the building for the entire duration of the project. He was not allowed to make any phone calls and agreed to keep quiet about anything that could happen for at least 10 years. Curious, Swan again agreed, and so began an adventure that he could never have imagined in his wildest dreams. A gruesome journey to the moon. Swan was amazed that the CIA, of all people, asked him to turn his consciousness to the moon. They showed Swan some areas of the moon and instructed him to use his skills of distance vision to accurately describe certain areas. In his book, published many years later, the medium reported on his experiment. Well, I was asked by some very mysterious people to do some remote viewing sessions over the moon, and they offered to pay me money. Before that, I was paid very little for most of the work I was involved in, so I said I would do it. And then, in these remote viewing sessions, I saw some things on the moon that I thought were really strange, like people there, and big structures and lots of activity and so on. At first, the CIA agents showed him places where there was nothing special, just big cliffs, craters, dunes of white-gray powder. Then, the medium shifted his consciousness to a place that was immediately different. Swan was speechless at first, then told of tracks on the lunar surface made by using machines like tractors on the ground. Other patterns indicated wind activity, but there was not a breath of air on the moon. Swan also noticed a strange crater filled with green haze. Curious to see what was producing the light, he approached the object in his mind. What he saw startled him. It was a large structure that resembled an airfield, with hangars, towers, roads, and machinery. Everywhere were visible signs of industrial activity. A quote from Swan. "Well, we were taught for many years that the moon was a dead place, with no water, no air, nothing. I saw air there. At least I don't think I commented about water on the moon, but it's only in the last 2 years that science has finally admitted that there is water and an atmosphere on the moon. But in the 60s, it was denied. Everyone was taught to believe it was a dead, airless place." Swan moved to another location and saw structures emitting light in different colors. As he stepped closer, the windows of the domes became clearer. Again, he could see the same green haze in the structure. But this time, he decided to look through the windows at the source. In the dome, he saw humanoid figures that looked almost like people, and they were clearly working on something. Suddenly, 2 of these creatures stopped their activity. The 2 instructed their cronies to go inside, and Swan mentally followed them. Just as he was about to project his distant vision through a window, the strange entities inside turned around. Swan was startled. He felt and saw that these beings could see his consciousness. Swan was frightened and told one of the twins that they could see him. The CIA agent instructed Swan to come back quickly. Swan opened his eyes and said, "You already knew they were clairvoyant." The only answer he got was that the experiment was over, and it was. Ingo Swan was taken out of the building, flown to Washington, and had to remain silent for 10 years. 10 years, Ingo Swan had to remain silent. Swan suffered years after the event from what he had seen. The aliens had shocked him. Swan had the pictures of the moon landings in his head, knew from official reports that not much more than rock and dust had been found on the moon. He could hardly talk to anyone about what he had seen. Only the closest confidants were privy to it. With some very good mediums and friends, Swan later ventured into a few more similar attempts. Well protected, the mediums projected their spirits on various planets and into the universe. What they saw was monstrous. After the end of his silence, Swan published several books, and it unfolded as one might expect. No one could confirm his experiences. Some considered Swan a genius, others a charlatan. Swan wrote, among other things, "One really can't avoid it anymore. There is the question of why the Soviet Union and the United States did not return to the moon in the 1970s, when they spent all that money to get there and colonize it. They suddenly stopped, and the public should ask the question why that was." Ingo Swan was not entirely alone in this view after all. Over the years, a community of media, ufologists, and whistleblowers came together, all reporting similar sightings or secret information from activities at NASA. Swan had clearly seen aliens operating a base on the moon in the late 1970s, and the CIA knew about it. According to Swan, there are several species outside Earth, of which he has seen traces on the moon and elsewhere. However, Swan warned against attempts to contact these beings. In particular, the medium experienced the aliens on the moon as hostile. These observations may explain why Russia suddenly abandoned plans to colonize the moon in the 1970s, and the US discontinued the Apollo program in the 1980s and has never returned to the moon since. Swan wrote 6 successful books. 6 others contained such explosive information that no publisher would publish the writings. There are many more exciting videos to come, so click subscribe now and keep watching. Will India show us the moon in a completely new way? In August 2023, the Chandrayaan 3 mission has landed, and scientists are expecting completely new findings. What exactly will the rover Pagan and lander Vikram study on the moon? And why did India land its rovers at the lunar South Pole, of all places? Join us on this mission and witness a nation conquer the moon. India's success mission lands on the moon. India is the 4th nation to successfully land a probe on the moon. With the Chandrayaan missions, India is making national and international space history. Indians have been outsiders in the space business, but this is about to change. Chandrayaan 1 and 2 were successful missions. The first launch of the Chandrayaan 3 mission was bad luck. The lander and a small rover slammed into the lunar surface, and years of work were lost. India did not hesitate, however, and built an almost identical new dual probe and sent it into space from the Satish Dhawan Space Center on July 14, 2023. On August 5th, Chandrayaan 3 ratcheted into lunar orbit. Less than 3 weeks later, the lander touched down near the lunar South Pole at 1803 Indian local time on August 23rd. This makes India the first nation to position a lunar rover at the strategically important South Pole. This probe will provide us with unique impressions of a region that no lander has explored before. Chandrayaan 3 consists of the lander Vikram and the rover Pagan. India rejoices. Chandrayaan 3 has landed. In India, millions celebrated the success when Vikram landed. This video was captured by Vikram's camera as Pagan rolls onto the lunar surface. Their descent and the rover's debut were fully automated. Control from Earth is possible, but the delay of the signals is close to 3 seconds. It takes 1.3 seconds to send a command from Earth to the Moon, and another 1.3 seconds to receive a response. In an emergency, this may be too long, so the lander and rover have been pre-programmed to perform their landing operation independently with the help of their onboard computers and sensors. Vikram and Pragyan are able to rely on their own artificial intelligence and capabilities at all times during their mission on the Moon. The video of the landing is a testament to how well and safely the two lunar probes perform. Other space agencies such as NASA expressed their enthusiasm and congratulated their colleagues from India. Landing probes on the Moon is a feat, and India pulled it off with flying colors. In other videos, the Pragyan rover can be seen happily cruising around on the lunar surface. It is controlled by its navigation camera and powered by its power module. Both probes landed near a small crater. Moving at a speed of 1 centimeter per second, Pragyan will now begin its research work at the Moon's south pole. Shortly after the successful landing, the rovers had to be put into a dormant mode in early September 2023. They slumbered for almost 2 weeks because there was no light at the South Pole during the lunar night. On September 22, 2023, the sun rose again at the South Pole, and the two were supposed to begin their work again. But Vikram and Pragyan did not react to the wake-up call at first. There was shock in India, and dozens of experts set out to troubleshoot the problem and continue India's big dream of lunar exploration. What has Chandrayaan-3 achieved so far? India conquering space was the dream of one man, Vikram Sarabhai, considered the father of India's space program. The visionary scientist founded the Indian Space Agency in 1969 and was the initiator of major space projects in India throughout his life. Vikram was considered a universal genius in India and a pioneer in fields of nuclear physics, cosmic rays, meteorology, education, industry, and social development. Let's look at another video. These images were taken by the Pragyan rover with its navigation camera. The video shows the Pragyan rover moving on the Moon with its 6 wheels powered by solar energy. The rover is the main instrument of the Chandrayaan-3 mission. It was designed to explore the lunar South Pole and perform various experiments and measurements there. Pragyan can move up to 500 meters away from the Vikram lander and communicates with Vikram and the Earth via radio signals. The small rover faces many challenges and is considered a technical masterpiece. A vehicle must cope with low gravity, deep dust, uneven terrain, and extreme temperatures on the Moon. Gravity on the Moon is only about 1/6 that of Earth. This means that the rover weighs much less on the Moon than it does on Earth. The vehicle has far less grip and stability and can easily make small jumps. Thanks to a special suspension, it nevertheless remains safely on the ground and comes back up gently after bounces. Pragyan takes small inclines and slopes as well as bumps with ease. With a speed limit of 1 centimeter per second, the automatic navigation system is able to maintain control at all times and calculates Pragyan's course on all subsurfaces and in all regions of the South Pole. The lunar surface is very rough and rocky with many craters, hills, and valleys. This makes it difficult for the rover to always find a smooth and flat path to move. Pragyan's intelligent navigation system uses sensors, cameras, and algorithms to map the terrain while planning the best route. Even obstacles are easily detected by the small vehicle, and it simply drives around them. The fine and sharp-edged dust particles of the Moon were a challenge for the designers. All lunar rovers have to cope with this peculiarity. For one thing, the wheels and navigation must be able to withstand the dust, and for another, the solar cells must be so well coated that dust does not adhere and result in a layer that blocks sunlight. Pragyan's dust protection system and self-powered brushes, a blower, and even a heater equip the little rover for every conceivable problem. This allows the rover to independently clean all of its instruments of dust buildup, keeping itself in tip-top shape at all times. The temperature differences on the Moon are extreme. At night or in the polar night, they can be as low as -156 degrees Celsius, and during the day, they rise regionally to as high as +121 degrees Celsius. This can cause thermal stress and damage to the rover's instruments. To overcome even this challenge, The rover has a thermal control system that uses insulation, radiators, and heaters to regulate its temperature. At first glance, the rover looks simple, but in fact, this small vehicle is a feat of engineering and the pride of India's space agency. We can look forward to seeing what this brave and curious machine will discover on the moon. Successful analysis of lunar rocks. Can you imagine that the moon is a treasure trove full of undiscovered riches? China recently proved just that with its Chang'e 5 mission. In a unique move, the rover sent rock samples back to Earth, and what researchers found inside was surprising. In addition to large amounts of water encased in the finest glass beads, an entirely new mineral emerged. One component of this mineral could revolutionize our world and all of space travel. Helium-3 is an isotope that can enable nuclear fusion and provide us with clean electricity. Chandrayaan-3 also has the job of taking rock samples and sending them back to Earth. Here, we see a diagram of the chemical composition of a sample of lunar rock analyzed by the Pagan rover's laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy, or LIBS instrument. It shows a bar graph of the elements present in the sample with their relative and percent abundance. LIBS is used to determine the chemical composition of lunar rock samples. To do this, LIBS uses intense laser pulses to heat rock into an extremely hot plasma that emits light. The instrument picks up the light and analyzes its wavelengths to identify elements present in the sample. Among other things, Chandrayaan-3 will determine whether the South Polar region differs in rock composition and minerals from other regions on the moon. The composition of the moon's rocks tells scientists much about the moon's origin and evolution. Astrogeologists gain extensive knowledge about precise geological processes and activities from the samples. Surprisingly, the results of this analysis showed that the lunar rocks in the South Polar region contain high amounts of sulfur. Sulfur is part of many biological molecules such as amino acids and proteins. In the cosmos, it's considered a biomarker. Although where sulfur occurs, life does not necessarily exist. Sulfur also occurs wherever there is volcanism or magma and lava. It can also be an indicator of meteorite impacts, as some types of meteorites contain sulfur. The presence of sulfur and other elements in lunar rocks in the South Pole region indicate that this region was active and possibly alive with volcanism in the past. These new findings are exciting and fascinating. Chandrayaan-3 may once again completely change our understanding of the moon and its history. The findings may also open new possibilities for future exploration and colonization of the moon. All of the elements available on the moon have a role to play and are being watched with excitement. Scientists around the world are currently working on systems that will allow lunar colonists to obtain water, oxygen, and fuels even on the moon. Mapping lunar surface temperature. Something that most people completely overlook about the moon is its extreme climate. The moon has virtually no protective layer. Sunlight burns on the surface during the day, and at night, the Earth's satellite is bitterly cold. Depending on the region, the temperatures of the lunar surface vary greatly, and it's an exciting thing for researchers to create a map of the moon that deals only with temperatures and climate zones. Temperature measurements are the business of the Vikram lander. Using its chased instrument, the lander will create a fine temperature profile of the lunar topsoil around the pole over the course of the mission. The long-term instrument will be the first to fully record the thermal behavior of the lunar surface. Chased is even capable of creating a thermal map of the lunar subsurface. The results of its first measurement showed that the temperature of the lunar surface and subsurface in the South Pole region varies from -156 degrees Celsius at night to +121 degrees Celsius during the day. This confirms that the South Pole region is one of the coldest and hottest places on the moon, and that it's a major challenge to the success of the Chandrayaan-3 mission. A day on the moon lasts 14 Earth days. Thus, Vikram and Pragyan work for 14 days at a time, and then they enter a rest mode during the cold 14-day lunar night. The mission has just begun and is expected to provide at least 1 year of new data from the moon. If you love amazing videos from space, subscribe to our channel now. India has landed a spacecraft near the lunar South Pole for the first time. Chandrayaan 3 is testing a possible site there for future lunar stations. This joins a lineup of 4 countries that may soon establish human presences on the moon. What has Chandrayaan 3 discovered there now, and what impact will it have on future lunar missions? Chandrayaan 3 and the moon's South Pole. On July 15, 2023, India's Chandrayaan 3 mission got underway. The destination of the 2 rovers, Vikram and Pragyan, is the lunar South Pole of the Earth's satellite. Did you know that this region, of all places, can be of utmost importance for future settlers? Large water deposits can provide humans with fresh water, oxygen, and fuel. In craters, where hardly any light penetrates, water has been present as ice for centuries. Chandrayaan 3 aims to study the lunar environment and resources around the South Pole and to investigate the temperature profile and chemical composition of the lunar rocks. The South Pole region can be valuable, but it's also challenging, with temperatures varying from -150 degrees to +120 degrees Celsius, depending on depth and time of day. The stationary lander Vikram will take the temperature measurements, while the small rover Pragyan will go on exploration tours. After big failure, success at last. Chandrayaan 3 is India's 3rd lunar mission and the first to land near the South Pole. Chandrayaan means lunar vehicle in Sanskrit, India's ancient language. The mission is part of India's ambitious space program, which began in 1962 with the launch of a first rocket. At that time, the rocket launched from a simple and remote fishing village. Today, India already has facilities that can rival NASA's large launch pads. In the 1960s, hardly anyone took notice of India as a space nation. The world eagerly followed the ambitious space race of the United States and the Soviet Union. India humbly carried on with its space project. The nation has since launched many satellites, rockets, and probes into space, and slowly has become one of the world's leading spacefaring nations. By the time India's first lunar mission, Chandrayaan 1, was launched in 2008, the attention was already elevated. People around the world took note of India's lunar orbiter. In particular, the Moon Impact Probe generated interest because this probe crashed directly into the moon. The impact allowed scientists to measure data and evidence of trace water molecules. Chandrayaan 2 launched in 2019, and at that time, a lander named Vikram and a rover named Pragyan already traveled to the moon. The orbiter that carried them is still orbiting the moon, but the mission did not end well for the lander and the rover. The 2 had an accident while descending to the lunar surface. The shock was great, but India's ambition was even greater. India did not give up its dream of landing at the South Pole, and shortly thereafter, another lander named Vikram and a rover named Pragyan set out on their journey as part of Chandrayaan 3. Both machines were almost exact replicas of the 2 brake pilots, with only a few minor improvements. A replica of the Chandrayaan 2 lander and rover, Chandrayaan 3 was launched from India's Satish Dhawan Space Center on July 15, 2023, and successfully poured into lunar orbit about a month later. On August 20, 2023, the lander-rover pair began the risky final descent to the South Pole region. Some people in India may have been sweating during the landing, but this time there was great jubilation. Vikram and Pragyan had landed successfully. The South Pole region is challenging and risky for such landings. Because of its location, signals from Earth can only be transmitted with a communication delay of about 3 seconds. This is too much to safely land probes with control from Earth. Chandrayaan 3 was on its own, relying entirely on its own onboard computers and sensors. The landing site was a risk, a barely explored region of which there was no detailed map. India showed courage in allowing the $2 million instruments to descend there. But the Indian spacewalkers were sure of their cause despite the failure of Chandrayaan 2. Chandrayaan 3 is equipped with a highly intelligent navigation system. A camera and a radar scanned the terrain on approach. Every rock and crater was sighted, and their flight path was adjusted to each obstacle. This fully automated landing navigation system is a masterpiece of engineering and received international acclaim. The little sunlight in the south polar region of the moon is the next challenge the mission must cope with. Chandrayaan 3 are equipped with their own batteries and solar cells for this purpose. Shortly after landing on August 20th, 2023, Vikram sent a first image of the moon's far side, and it set down its small rover. Vikram was named after the pioneer of Indian space travel. Dr. Vikram Sarabhai was the founder of the Indian Space Agency and an astronomer, nuclear physicist, and visionary extraordinaire. Pragyan is Sanskrit for wisdom. Together, the two will study the South Pole for at least 6 months. Vikram's mission objectives. Chandrayaan 3 has 2 main objectives: to advance India's soft landing capability for space probes and to conduct scientific experiments to explore the South Pole. Chandrayaan 3 has a total of 14 pieces of technical equipment, cameras, and other gimmicks to measure various aspects of the lunar surface and underworld. One of the most important instruments aboard the lander is Chastity, short for Chandra's Surface Thermophysical Experiment. Chastity is a device that uses a rod-shaped probe that can drill up to 10 centimeters into lunar dust and then measure temperatures as well as mineral components. Chastity is a first. Never before has a similar instrument been used on the moon or on Mars. It's not only in India that people are eager to see how this experiment will go. Researchers worldwide will benefit from the findings of the Chandrayaan 3 mission. Temperatures at depth are expected to range from 10 degrees to 60 degrees Celsius. The data collected by Chastity will help estimate how deep water is buried beneath the dust and the effort settlers would have to make to harness those water supplies. Another important instrument aboard Vikram is the Lunar Retroreflector Array, LRA. This device has 8 mirrors that can reflect laser beams. It can be used to measure the distances of objects on the moon. But LRA can do something else. The device is suitable for measuring the exact distance between the lunar pole and Earth. Vikram's measurements are expected to yield the most accurate data ever, and incidentally, the results are expected to confirm Einstein's theory of general relativity. Some of the predictions of the theory concern the way massive objects bend space and time around them. The Earth curves space more than the moon because of its weight. Nevertheless, the moon's weight must also have some influence on the Earth's gravitational pull. The accurate measurements provide an opportunity to test some of these predictions. Pragyan's mission goals. The rover Pragyan will use the Alpha Particle X-ray Spectrometer, APXS, to analyze the chemical composition of lunar rocks and soil. To do this, the rover will steer over the lunar surface at a speed of 1 centimeter per second, looking for the best spots to explore. Using a concentrated beam of alpha particles and X-rays, minerals and elements in the environment become measurable, and Pragyan can even create maps of the exact distribution and formation of minerals and rocks. The LIBS instrument is a laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy. It's a device that can vaporize a small amount of lunar material by using a powerful laser beam. The material is heated so that it emits light, and these light beams tell the spectrometer precise proportions of elements and minerals, and can even reveal the isotopic ratios of various elements. First images of Chandrayaan 3. The Indian Space Agency has already shared the first exciting results. Images and videos shared on Twitter show Chandrayaan 3 landing, the rover rolling out of Vikram's belly, first test drives, and the Indian Space Agency shared first measurement results. Vikram and Pragyan were successfully deployed for a few days in late August and early September, and then the lunar night fell. The lander and rover can only operate for 1 lunar day at a time. Then the light says goodbye and night falls for 14 days. After the long moon night, the moon day, which also lasts 14 days, begins. Imagine once you are moon settlers and must live with the fact that the day lasts 14 Earth days and the night just as long. How would you feel about that? Let us know in the comments. The lander and rover certainly don't have a biological clock that gets messed up. However, these two also have to adjust to the moon and go into standby mode during the lunar night. Then, when it gets light again, the two begin drilling into the ground once more, measuring temperatures and seismic activity analyzing samples, and exploring new locations. All the while, the lander and rover communicate with the Chandrayaan-2 orbiter, which then sends data to the Indian Space Agency's Mission Control Center in Bengaluru. The orbiter will continue to orbit the Moon for at least another 7 years, but whether Chandrayaan-3 will be in service that long is questionable. The lander and rover are exposed to violent influences from large temperature fluctuations and lunar dust on the lunar surface. Both probes are equipped with highly sensitive technical measuring units, as well as an internal cleaning system. In particular, the solar panels and camera lenses must be constantly cleaned of fine lunar dust. How long the mission will last is an open question. In India, people are happy about every day that Chandrayaan-3 is in operation. A milestone for India's space program. Chandrayaan-3 is already a resounding success for India. The mission will not only advance national science. Vikram and Pagan's new impressions of the Moon are a source of inspiration for all of us. Chandrayaan-3 will open important knowledge about new possibilities and opportunities for future lunar missions. It is desirable that all nations currently present on the Moon will find peaceful cooperation and perhaps in the future, resource sharing. India is close to NASA and ESA and has shown openness to joint missions in the future. Will this make the Moon the center of Earth peace? We'll see. Other nations with a presence on the Moon include China and Russia. The Chinese are currently exploring the far side of the Moon, which is still largely unknown. The Russian lunar program currently has an orbiter in lunar orbit, and by 2040, the Russians would also like to establish their own space station on the Moon. India's plans for a space station are currently still up in the air. Initially, Chandrayaan-4 is scheduled to launch in 2025 and bring lunar material from the South Pole region back to Earth for further analysis. If you want to see more exciting videos, press subscribe now. Does the James Webb Telescope finally offer us the key to the true origin of the universe? A groundbreaking hypothesis challenges the existence of the Big Bang and could revolutionize our understanding of space and time. Theories more than a century old could be collapsing before our eyes, and the universe we thought we knew is being revealed in a whole new light. James Webb shocks science. The new images of the cosmos taken by the James Webb Space Telescope are breathtaking. Star clusters, quasars, and cosmic nebulae are appearing sharper and more accurately before our eyes than ever before. But most astronomers and cosmologists are shocked, and that concerns one particular image. This innocuous-looking image, which shows a colorful smorgasbord of a few brightly shining stars in the foreground and many thousands of galaxies glowing red in the background, has it all. Possibly the oldest galaxies of the universe are to be seen here. Can you already imagine what can be so terrible about a few old galaxies that scientists are nervous since this discovery? We'll tell you. These galaxies break the rules of previous physical assumptions and overthrew the cosmological worldview and the theory of the Big Bang virtually overnight. Too old, too dense, too massive, and too luminous was the conclusion. These galaxies can certainly not help it that they do not fit into the worldview of the astronomers. They are simply what they are, or were. With an age of 13.5 billion years and more, they existed allegedly at the beginning of time. We remember now. The Big Bang is supposed to have happened 13.8 billion years ago, and after that, there was not much for a long time. If we follow previous model calculations to star formation and galaxy formation, the first stars appeared some 100 million years after the Big Bang, until the first complex galaxies were born. Actually, billions of years must have passed. You might already be thinking, here, something is not right. Because these galaxies shone fixed and ready, plump with stars 200 to 300 million years after the Big Bang. But it gets better. Because the galaxies, which got the nickname Universe Crusher, show a very high degree of order, and very probably they are based on elements which actually should not have existed at this time and in that form. The scientists thought fine. It's over with model calculations and theories. James Webb presented the unpleasant truth to astronomers and cosmologists of this world. Panic among scientists. There are many surprises, of which not all are always pleasant. The title of an article from the time shortly after the publication of the first measurement data begins therefore with a direct exclamation: panic. It's not difficult, even for laymen, to understand why these numerous, old and brightly radiating galaxies are not compatible with the Big Bang theory. Nevertheless, researchers peddle, argue, calculate, and simply don't want to admit it. How in heavens could these galaxies be explainable after all? Some scientists find it difficult to say goodbye to hard-won theories. The idea was too beautiful to know almost everything about the universe. But how did the astronomers actually come to it? Well, that is quite simple. Astronomers and cosmologists took the standard rules of physics, which to this day are a mixture of Newtonian physics, Einstein's general theory of relativity, and real observations. Then they compare, calculate, infer, and create equations. Nowadays, cosmologists feed computers with the data and come up with model scenarios that are consistent with all known values and rules. The Big Bang theory came about through observations of the expanding universe. Edwin Hubble, a renowned astronomer of the early 20th century, made an exciting discovery when he observed the redshift of light from distant galaxies. According to the rules of science at the time, it looked very much as if galaxies were moving away from each other. The farther away a galaxy was, the faster it seemed to be moving away from us. This was taken as the first concrete evidence that the universe was expanding. The idea that the universe was expanding led to the logical conclusion that it must have been smaller in the past. If you run time backwards, you come to a point where the entire universe was concentrated in an extremely hot and dense state. This point has been called the Big Bang. Georges Lemaître, a Belgian priest and astrophysicist, came up with the idea a few years before Hubble that the universe originated from an original primordial atom or primordial egg and then expanded. In 1927, Lemaître published his work based on the equations of Einstein's general theory of relativity. In 1931, he expanded the hypothesis to include calculations reporting an extremely hot and dense primordial soup that wafted through space immediately after the Big Bang. Lemaître described this initial state as a primordial atom or cosmic egg that broke in a violent explosion, marking the beginning of the universe. Initially, Albert Einstein was skeptical of Lemaître's idea of an expanding universe. Einstein believed in a static universe. However, after more and more evidence of the expansion of the universe was found, especially by Hubble's observations, Einstein finally accepted Lemaître's theory and abandoned his own idea of a static universe. Einstein had originally introduced a cosmological constant into his equations to support a static universe. After the expansion of the universe was accepted, Einstein referred to this constant as his biggest mistake. Interestingly, Lemaître argued that this constant could have a real physical meaning, and in modern cosmology, the idea of a cosmological constant in the form of dark energy has regained importance. The Big Bang theory was later supported by other observations, such as the apparently also expanding cosmic background radiation, but it never quite made the sense that we humans so desperately seek. What was before? Where does the universe develop? And why did all this come into being? None of the astrophysicists and cosmologists could explain these questions so far. What would you say if I claim that all these calculations and equations have always been a bit thin? Because there were just as many theories which assumed something completely different. If these scientists had been right, the cosmological worldview would look possibly completely different. Let's take Fritz Zwicky, for example. The Swiss-American interpreted the red shift of light which goes out from very old objects in the universe completely differently. He saw in the shift of light frequency into the reddish no indication that galaxies move away from us. Zwicky recognized a fatigue of light during its long journey through space. There are meanwhile just as many observations which speak against the expansion of the universe. Only these are still measured at the yardstick of the old rules and theories. But this could be at an end now. The impossible galaxies. Big Bang theorists have known for years that images from the Hubble Space Telescope already point to the existence of very unusually old and well-developed galaxies. The galaxy GNZ 11, spotted by Hubble, had an age of 13.4 billion years. Remember, we talked earlier in the video about galaxies taking billions of years to evolve. But 13.4 billion years is only 400 million years from the supposed Big Bang, Well, GNZ11 could have been an outlier or the first real galaxy. The pictures of Hubble were also not quite as good as those of James Webb. GNZ11 is also very small, and it could have been one of these mini galaxies, which by merging with other small galaxies produced even larger formations. Nevertheless, the development was actually foreseeable. Only no astronomer had really reckoned with the surprise and shock the new space telescope delivered. James Webb made things much worse, at least for those who want to continue to hold on to old theories. James Webb saw galaxies as large, bright, and existing as smooth disks, and perfect spiral shapes long before GNZ11. The article mentions that researchers discovered about 10 times more smooth spiral galaxies than researchers would have expected at the beginning of galaxy formation. This evidence not only challenges the Big Bang and theories of the evolution of first stars, but also completely destroys the merger theory. Is the Big Bang still tenable? Does the existence of these galaxies now prove that the Big Bang did not happen at all? Possibly. We don't know yet. The discoveries have been studied for months now, but researchers may need years to get to the bottom of the mystery of galaxies and the cosmos. The Big Bang is the idea that our universe was initially a hot, dense, and uniform point. Particles flew around freely, and it was far too hot for bonds and matter to form. As it expanded, the primordial soup is said to have cooled. The first molecules were formed, gases, dust, and finally the elementary forces of nature appeared. Electromagnetism, radiations, and the gravitation formed, with time and all that we can see today in the cosmos. Stars, planets, moons, black holes, and much more. Until now, the theories made sense along with most of these observations, but not anymore. Rajendra Gupta is a Canadian Indian researcher who presented a study that brings the theory of the Big Bang together with the observations of the impossible galaxies after all. Only then, the universe is at least 27 or even 40 billion years old, and a few changes would have to be made to cosmological constants and the interpretation of redshift so that everything is red again. But then, will we have the truth? Well, no. We would have a new theory that might be valid until real observations find otherwise. With the shock in classical science, quantum theorists are now stepping forward. Particle scientists have long said that the Big Bang is a rigid idea and that the multiverse is much more likely. According to this, the Big Bang may not have been the absolute beginning of everything that exists, but it could be the origin of our universe, and that could be in a larger universe or have many neighboring universes. The idea that the universe is neither temporally or spatially limited is also not yet completely off the table. Fact is that we have found at present still no single reference to a spatial end. We meanwhile survey more than 93 billion light-years of seemingly endless universe, and now we look back 13.5 billion years into the past and find, as it looks, also no clear end. If you love exciting videos like this about astronomy and science, then subscribe to our channel now and press the like button. Imagine looking up into the sky with your amateur telescope and catching sight of something no human has ever seen before. Thus began the once-in-a-lifetime spectacle of Comet Nishimura. Its discoverer, Hideo Nishimura, peered into the dawn with his telescope as he did every day, and shortly thereafter, a unique comet was named after him. Nishimura will give us a spectacle as a green glowing comet that we don't see every day. Now, we'll tell you what you need to know about this unique natural spectacle. One morning in August 2023, the comet was unexpectedly discovered by a Japanese man. Hideo Nishimura was amazed at what he saw hurtling towards Earth. No map or Astro News had announced a comet, but Hideo Nishimura was sure he had spotted just such a celestial body. Hastily, he reported his find, and a short time later, the lucky Japanese man was the namesake for a comet. Shocked, the discoverer announced his find among friends, calling it the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. A comet discovered by him and, which will also bear his name, that was like winning the lottery for the passionate amateur astronomer. Nishimura naturally wished that his comet would become a big one like Hale-Bopp, and that all the world would admire his comet. But the predictions were not entirely clear for a long time. Comets can evolve in very unpredictable ways. Some become bright celestial spectacles, while others pass us by without a sound and can only be seen with special equipment. On September 16, 2023, the comet had reached its closest point to Earth. Already since the beginning of September 2023, the comet was visible with the naked eye. If you looked in the direction of the constellation Leo between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, you could see the comet as a bright point of light. In the light pollution of cities, comets may not be visible, which is why many stargazers head to the countryside specifically to catch a glimpse of comets coming close to the Earth. Comets are among the celestial bodies that are most visible from Earth. Many people associate good fortune with them and see them as harbingers of a good time. Numerous astronomers and astronomical associations have launched websites in honor of the surprising visitor Nishimura, publishing photos of the brightly shining visitor. The most beautiful pictures can be seen on the homepage of the discoverer himself. Comets are bright sky spectacles. When talking about Nishimura reaching its closest point to us, we still mean that it's almost 60 million kilometers away from us. That's roughly 40 times the distance between Earth and the Moon. So, comets like this one are far enough away not to endanger us. Although we can never completely rule out the possibility of a comet being on a direct collision course with Earth. That's why huge telescopes are looking up at the sky around the clock, trying to spot objects like comets and asteroids in time. It was truly a stroke of luck that none of the major observatories had spotted the new comet, but instead a Japanese retiree who enthusiastically looks up at the sky with his telescope every morning. Nishimura's wish that his comet should become a brilliantly bright spectacle was partially fulfilled. The brightness of comets depends on many factors, such as their size, shape, composition, activity, distance from the Sun and Earth, and viewing angle. In the recent past, we have witnessed two very bright and spectacular comets. Hale-Bopp in 1997 thrilled billions of people, and comet Neowise in 2020 was also among the great comets. Kahutek in 1973 and Ison in 2013 turned out rather faint and were only visible with very good telescopes. The new comet, Nishimura, was discovered when it was about 300 million kilometers away from the Sun. It was moving very fast towards us at about 70 kilometers per second, or more than 250,000 kilometers per hour. Nishimura was discovered comparatively late, just over 1 month before its flyby of Earth. It had already passed its closest point to the Sun on September 25, 2023. Comets can be seen from Earth for very different lengths of time. This also depends on their luminosity and size. Nishimura evolved into a wonderful green light show with a fine tail, but only visible with good equipment. If you're comet crazy, it's best to make a pilgrimage to a nearby observatory to see the rare cosmic visitor in all its glory. Currently, astronomers and amateur stargazers are still trembling over what will happen to Nishimura. There is a risk that it will not survive its close flyby of the Sun. The intense heat and radiation from the Sun could cause the comet to break apart or vaporize completely. This has happened to many comets before, such as Comet Atlas in 2020. Nishimura's origin in Oort's cloud. Comets are fascinating celestial bodies. Astronomers believe that they may be the messengers of life. Unlike asteroids, comets are made of ice and organic materials rather than solid rock. It has long been suspected that comets were the messengers of water, transforming our planet into a world of oceans and seas. The ice that comets are made of dates back to the early days of the solar system. Ancient objects like comets and asteroids cavort in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, in the Kuiper belt behind Neptune, and in the Oort cloud, a mysterious region far out. The Oort cloud is a spherical structure that is up to 100,000 astronomical units away from the Sun. 1 astronomical unit is the average distance between the Earth and the Sun, or about 150 million kilometers. Oort's cloud is where the solar system objects farthest from the Sun cluster. The spherical collection of rock, ice, and dust is so cold and dark that no telescope can detect the objects in the cloud. It's believed to contain trillions of comets that are remnants of the formation of the solar system about 4.6 billion years ago. Sometimes, something can yank these comets from their original orbits and push them into the inner solar system. Comet migrations are triggered by passing stars, giant planets, or galactic gravitational forces exerted by Milky Way structures on all objects in the galaxy. Some comets are only slightly displaced and then come closer and closer on very large orbits. Others are literally thrown out of the cloud and race with great speeds towards the sun. If comets come close to a large planet on their journey, they can receive a gravitational push that realigns their orbit or pushes them back towards the edge of the solar system. Comets can also be attracted to gas giants like Jupiter and Saturn. In 1994, comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 came too close to Jupiter, was attracted to it, and was crushed. Comets, once they leave their safe harbors, are playthings of gravitational forces. Some get caught in elliptical orbits around the sun and spend decades or centuries spinning their orbits. Others get caught in a hyperbolic orbit and are literally ejected from the solar system. This may have happened to comet Nishimura, and Oort's cloud may be home to many other comets that have been inside at some point and then flung into one of the orbits farthest from the sun. A unique visitor. The orbit of comet Nishimura turned out to be just such a hyperbolic orbit. So, it will visit us only once and then leave the inner solar system again. Perhaps it will return again in many thousands of years. Comet Nishimura is not only a beautiful sight, but also a treasure trove of secrets for astronomers and scientists who want to study comets in the solar system. Astronomers hope that the comet will be highly visible for a long time, and that they will be able to study its behavior, composition, and brightness in detail. Comets are capricious celestial bodies. They change their brightness, suddenly fall apart, or disappear completely under the influence of the sun. Astronomers would love to send probes to comets, but their unpredictability makes them difficult targets. Comet Nishimura, too, can change its brightness dramatically depending on its distance from the sun and Earth, viewing angle, and activity level. At its closest point to the sun, it appeared a bright green. The color can change again to a soft white as it continues its flight. Green comets are quite common. Comet Lovejoy, which was particularly visible in early 2015, shone a bright green as well. Comet Lulin, in 2009, also showed a distinct green color, as did Comet 46P/Wirtanen, which passed us in December 2018. The green color of some comets is caused by molecules found in the nucleus of the comet and in the gaseous envelope around the nucleus. Specifically, it's the molecules dicyan and cyanogen that emit green light when excited by ultraviolet light from the sun. These molecules absorb the ultraviolet sunlight and then emit it as a green light. The closer cyan-rich comets get to the sun, the more conspicuous the green becomes. Despite certain similarities, each comet is unique. Nishimura may be made of completely different types of ice and dust than other comets that have regular orbits around the sun. For astronomers, samples from these celestial bodies would be unique opportunities to study organic matter from the infancy of the solar system. If probes succeed in landing on the comets, researchers would have the opportunity to study 4.6 billion-year-old ice and dust. Comets from the Oort cloud could also tell us more about what is going on out there and where the objects in the cloud come from. Indeed, it's very conceivable that the Oort cloud harbors objects that originated in other solar systems. If comets are ejected very far from their systems, they can become interstellar objects and travel billions of kilometers. Although there is no evidence yet for comets as the celestial messengers of life and water, it's conceivable that life could piggyback on comets in space in this way. Because probes are not currently the standard study methods for comets, astronomers and scientists are using other methods and instruments to study comets like Nishimura. Some of these are Earth-based telescopes that can take images and spectra of the comet from various locations on Earth. Space telescopes such as Hubble and James Webb observe comets above the atmosphere and in different wavelengths of light. A few years ago, the twin Rosetta Philae spacecraft reached a comet that shows a relatively stable and reliable orbit. Philae even landed to conduct experiments there. Probes are not always available. They require a lot of planning, coordination, funding, and time. Rosetta Philae was a unique project of the ESA. In the future, there should be more missions to comets. For now, however, NASA and ESA face a number of challenges here, including communications, navigation, power, and safety. Subscribe to our channel now and look forward to many more interesting videos.